Hello, my friends, TGIF. If you're listening on Friday, that's when I'm recording this late Friday morning. I was up late with several of you hosting a subscriber-only hangout for about 2.5 hours. And if you didn't stay till the end when there was about 30 people left, then you missed some wonderful improvised performances by the great John Carroll and the great Gareth Sever at the end. I'm going to give you a little sample of John Carroll last night, as well as a taste of Gareth Sever, and I'll play their whole performances at the end of my conversation with David Cay Johnston, which starts at 44 minutes into today's show. But first, just a little taste of what we got from John a cappella last night. Well, mostly a cappella.
Down and he whispered low. He told a brother Noah where he wanted him to go. He said, look, brother Noah, the rain done stopped and parked this jitney on a mountaintop. He showed brother Noah a rainbow sign. Showed brother Noah a rainbow sign and said it won't be a flood but a fire next time. It's gonna rain, children. Lord gonna send the water from Zion. You know it's gonna raise the heavens up high. It's gonna rain, 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 it's gonna rain. Children, Lord gonna send the water from Zion. You know it's gonna raise the heavens up high. It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain.
Yeah, that's right. That's John Carroll. He writes, performs the music here on the show. Let's get it started with our favorite song, everybody's favorite song. You got to stand up.
Stand up.
Hello and welcome to the Friday show. Thank you very much for joining me. I have a great conversation with David Cay Johnston, which I also posted yesterday on YouTube because I went live on YouTube, youtube.com/standupwithpete. And I went live, surprised about, 15 of you joined that are subscribers and that got an alert. But I wasn't planning on it until a few minutes before I said to David Cay Johnston, can we go live? He said, yes. He's great. He's always great. And you can jump ahead to that conversation if you want, or you can stay here with me as I go through some of the headlines from yesterday. And I got a few clips for you as well. Again, sorry for being so late this morning. Hopefully it doesn't matter too much. I know a lot of people are very routine and like the consistency of the podcast being there as well as everything else in their life. And I wish I were more like you. I do. I want to be more routine and have more consistency in my life. And yet I am unable to achieve that. So maybe I don't want it. Let's get deep on my own issues. Anyway, I'm happy to have you here, and I appreciate very much all of you who joined me last night at the Hangout, everybody who supports this podcast with a paid subscription. I cannot do it without your very thoughtful and important subscription fee, which is as little as $5 or as much as you want. Everybody gets the same offerings, including being a member of our community and being invited to the bi-weekly Hangouts. I won't be doing one Monday. I will be back on Thursday for a hangout, but I'm here right now with you, and it's time to go through the headlines. That's right. Oh, wait, before I do, as a way to get into them, I think it might be just a good sampling, just one line that Gareth Sever sang in his improvised song. The dude is so talented. He hangs out with us, chimes in, and then takes notes and writes a song based on like a 2-hour conversation with over 50, 60 people. It's such a unique talent that he has. And, well, here's just one line from it to get us into the news headlines.
So everything is pure chaos. If you feel like me, you feel so lost.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just use that as a drop every day to get into the news, or I'll have Gareth refine it. Maybe Pete Co can collaborate. We need more jingles. We need more fun stuff getting in the headlines and into the clips. So I am putting the challenge out there to all of our talented writers and creators. If anybody wants to put together some jingles, I'd be happy to throw them in there from time to time, or back to consistency, maybe every day, which is how often I do this podcast. By the way, Christian Finnegan is scheduled to join me for Saturdays with Christian. We'll recap the week and talk about whatever else we want to, and I should have that for you tomorrow morning, maybe even tonight. Might go live with him on YouTube at 5 p.m. Stay tuned, or just subscribe to the YouTube channel and it will let you know. YouTube.com/standupwithpete. All right. Well, Lots to talk about in terms of yesterday's news, and I'll go through headlines in normal rapid succession with little detail, but I'm going to go deep on the big story yesterday, broke last night, and I will read from Heather Cox Richardson's Substack, Letters from an American, which you should subscribe to. Many of you are subscribed to it. She writes and recaps it this way. Today, Senator Chris Van Hollen posted a picture of himself with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man whom the Trump administration says it sent to the notorious CCOT prison in El Salvador through administrative error but can't get back, and wrote, I said my main goal this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight, I had that chance. I've called his wife Jennifer to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return. While the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, apparently tried to stage a photo that would make it look as if the two men were enjoying a cocktail together, it seems clear that backing down and giving Senator Van Hollen access to Abrego Garcia is a significant shift from Bukele's previous scorn for those trying to address the crisis of a man legally in the U.S. having been sent to prison in El Salvador without due process. Bukele might be reassessing the distribution of power in the U.S. According to Robert Jimison of the New York Times, he traveled to El Salvador with Senator Van Hollen. When a reporter asked President Donald Trump if he would move to return Abrego Garcia to the United States, Trump answered, well, I'm not involved. You have to speak to the lawyers, the Department of Justice. Today, a federal appeals court rejected the Trump administration's attempt to stop Judge Paula Zenas' order that it take all available steps to bring Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. as soon as possible. The conservative judge, whose name is J. Harvey Wilkinson, J. Harvey Wilkinson, who was appointed by President Ronald Reagan, wrote the order. Notably, it began with a compliment to Judge Zenas. We shall not be micromanaging the efforts of a fine district judge attempting to implement the Supreme Court's recent decision. That's what he wrote. Then Wilkinson turned his focus on the Trump administration. He said, it is difficult in some cases to get at the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it's not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of the custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. The government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. The court noted that if the government is so sure of its position, then it should be confident in presenting its facts to a court of law. And echoing the liberal justices on the Supreme Court, Wilkinson wrote, if today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? He noted the reports that the administration is talking about doing just that. So you got to read the recap. I think, well, that's Heather Cox Richardson anywhere, and I wanted to do that for you here. I wanted to give you as much context as I could on that because I thought that judge's rulings read with my amazing performance would probably resonate with you as much as they did with me when I read them in my own amazing performance voice. So there you go. That is the latest. There's a lot more, obviously, in terms of what the Trump administration and how they're reacting, the Trump regime, forgive me, and how about MAGA is framing the whole situation, of course. In MAGA world, a very different view of the same encounter circulated. This is, of course, from the Salvadoran president, Nayib Bukele, who posted 3 photos of Van Hollen and Abrego Garcia in his trollish tone, delighting in the spectacle. Kilmar Abrego Garcia miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Senator Van Hollen in the tropical paradise of El Salvador. That's my impression of Nayib Bukele, by the way. I nailed it. And this is what they wanted, according to Politico's playbook. There was more than a little stage managing apparent in Bukele's photos. Abrego Garcia was dressed in a plaid button-down shirt and civilian clothes, not in CCOT's sterile white prisoner uniforms. His shorn head was covered by an immaculate Kansas City Chiefs ball cap rather than meeting in front of the hellish backdrop of the brutal prison, which has been made available for photo ops by the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, among others. Van Hollen and Abrego Garcia are instead shown sitting at what appears to be a cafe table. Their places set with cherry-rimmed glasses as if the two were leisurely sipping Shirley Temples. This is how Bukele and likely the White House wanted this interaction to appear. And the White House aides and their allies on Capitol Hill, Politico says, quickly moved to try and paint Van Hollen's meeting with Abrego Garcia as a potent example of Democrats' misplaced sympathies. We've reached a point in American politics where we have one party led by presidential Donald Trump that fights for Americans and a second party, I guess, led by AOC that fights for illegal aliens, said Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller to Fox News' Sean Hannity. It's a perfect Stephen Miller impression by me. All right, well, that's what I've got for you on that, but there is a lot more to talk about in the headlines, and let's get to some of those other big stories. The Secretary of State, this is breaking this morning, who once called the guy who gave him his job, Trump, a con artist, and Trump once referred to his Secretary of State as if he had a small penis. Anyway, this is the headline, that the U.S. might abandon efforts to end the Ukraine war. Marco Rubio says the U.S. is to decide in days if end to Ukraine war is doable. He said, if it is not possible to end the war in Ukraine, we need to move on. Wow, broken promise. I thought it was supposed to end on day one. A lot to think about right there, but that is a huge story and major development, of course. It looks like they're caving on trying to make any difference there. They're going to probably let and help and support Russia in that horrible war. Next headline, moving on. A judge ruled Google broke the law to maintain an advertising monopoly. In other news, Trump indicated yesterday that he may not want to raise tariffs on China any higher and claimed that the Chinese officials wanted to begin talks with the U.S., so he's caving there, it would seem. Clearly, he realizes that China has a lot more leverage and power than we do in this dumb conflict that he has escalated. Terrible news in Tallahassee where 2 people are dead, 6 others injured, brought to the hospital after an active shooter was reported at a college, Florida State University in Tallahassee, and the details are coming out on the suspect, and he looks like he was, well, apparently he was the son of a local deputy sheriff, and he was an extremist, it would seem, on the right. He hated multiculturalism and communism is one report. So reserve judgment on his motive, but it's going to be coming clear pretty soon, and it'll be interesting to hear if Trump – see, he won't even mention this shooter. What he mentioned yesterday, his reaction apparently in the Oval Office was to protect the guns, not the people, by the way. He's doing nothing on gun violence in America. It's going to take a scene a lot more horrific than that for him to probably even comment anymore. And if this guy does turn out to be a supporter of his, well, we'll never acknowledge it. He'll just never acknowledge it. Will he be asked about it? Yeah, at some point, maybe. Moving on. Well, a U.S. appeals court, the Fourth Circuit, urged the Trump regime yesterday to back off its escalating confrontation with the judiciary, warning that both the executive and judicial branches risk losing public confidence. In a strongly worded unanimous opinion, a 3-judge panel, the Fourth Circuit, rejected Trump's request to stop a judge from probing what the government had done to secure the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a migrant it acknowledged having wrongly deported to El Salvador. And so I think I read a little bit from that earlier. The Supreme Court Thursday said it will hear oral arguments next month on whether the Trump administration can take steps to enforce its contentious proposal to end automatic birthright citizenship while litigation continues. The court, in a brief order, deferred action on an emergency request made by the Trump administration to narrow the scope of nationwide injunctions imposed by judges. The policy, for now, remains blocked nationwide. So that is a Supreme Court case, of course, to watch. Also, in environmental destruction news, Trump regime forces say destroying endangered species habitats isn't actual harm. They're trying to redefine the word harm, and what could be one of the most significant actions the Trump regime has taken on the environment. A proposed rule would narrow the definition of harm under the Endangered Species Act and could open the door to more mining, construction, and opening, I guess, Trump casinos on Big Ben or wherever he wants. Just, fill the Grand Canyon with oil to move it quicker. Officials said the move would reduce an unnecessary regulatory burden. Yeah, right. I'm sure it's an unnecessary regulatory burden. The Endangered Species Act Conservationists, of course, warned it would open the door to more logging, mining, oil and gas drilling, home construction, and other ecologically damaging ventures in places where endangered creatures actually live. So the fascists are proposing redefining what it means to harm a plant or animal under the Endangered Species Act, excluding habitat destruction from activities deemed a threat to a protected species, of course. So that's a story to watch and probably dig into with a guest here on the show. Well, the power grabs continue. The White House has fired 2 Democratic board members of the National Credit Union administration. The officials said on Wednesday, as our homegrown dictator Donald Trump expanded efforts to influence independent, quote, independent, formerly independent regulatory agencies. So that's probably a segment we should do every week. How is our homegrown dictator trying to influence formerly independent regulatory agencies, and what does it mean, with your host, Pete Dominick? That should be interesting. Member of a former regulatory agency, a guy named Chris Krebs, the former senior cybersecurity official whom our homegrown dictator Donald Trump fired for affirming the truth that the 2020 presidential election was secure, is now leaving his private sector cybersecurity job after he and his company were targeted by Trump last week. So there are consequences to his actions. Let's see if Chris Krebs ends up, maybe just buying a small little place on the Amalfi Coast. Oh, and how about this unfolding headline or strategy in the South? Of course, Southern Republicans are pushing their states to formally embrace the name Gulf of America, the name President Donald Trump has bestowed on the Gulf of Mexico, and also require its use on maps, textbooks, and signs, because that's what you want your taxpayer money to go to. That's the agenda that you want public servants to be pushing and thinking about and being concerned with renaming a body of water, because that affects your life a great deal. I hope people see that. I don't know if they do, but it's so gross. It's so hacky and unoriginal and sycophanty and Saddam Hussein-y. I don't like it. I know and hope that other people down there don't and see it for what it is. Going back once more to Heather Cox Richardson, I like what she also wrote here at the end of today's newsletter. She says there seems to be a change in the air. 3 days ago, on April 14th, Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times wrote that the vibe is shifting against the right. Yesterday, former neocon and now fervent Trump critic and editor of The Bulwark, Bill Kristol, posted a photo of plainclothes immigration and customs officers kidnapping Tufts University graduate student and commented, "Where does the Abolish ICE movement go to get its apology?" Wow. Today in the New York Times, conservative David Brooks called for all of those resisting what he called a, quote, multi-front assault to make the earth a playground for ruthless men to work together. He called for a comprehensive national civic uprising that would first stop Trump and then create a long-term vision of a fairer society that is not just hard on Trump, but hard on the causes of Trumpism, one that offers a positive vision. Brooks is hardly the first to suggest that this is what America needs right now, but conservative like Brooks not only arguing that Trump is shackling the greatest institutions in American life, but then quoting Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto to call for resistance to those shackles. We have nothing to lose but our chains, signals that a shift is underway. That shift is apparently swept in New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, who is generally a good barometer of the way today's non-MAGA Republicans are thinking. In an interview yesterday, he said, "My feelings about not only Trump, but the administration are falling like a boulder going into the Mariana Trench. So the memory of things that this administration has done, of which I approve, is drowning in the number of things that are, in my view, reckless, stupid, awful, un-American, hateful, and bad, not just for the country, but also for the conservative movement." And Bret Stephens identified Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance's bullying of Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office as the event that turned him away from Trump. Really? That's what it took, Bret Stephens? He said America should never treat an ally that way, certainly not the one who is bravely fighting a common enemy. Stephens also noted the meeting had delighted Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who is now emboldened to press the war harder. Wow, Bret Stephens, thanks for getting on the boat like 15 years too late, but we've seen a similar moment of shifting coalitions before in the past, and what could it foretell? Well, you have to finish reading Heather Cox Richardson because that's when she goes into the history of it all. Well, that is what I've got for you on the headlines. Now it's time to get to clips. And this morning, our friend Tina Winsett sent me this clip of former Treasury Secretary Robert Reich giving a speech at his alma mater and the school he's worked at and lived at. He's a pillar of that community and of integrity, because he resigned from the Trump administration as Treasury Secretary when he disagreed with what they were doing. And what they were doing eventually brought down the entire world economy in 2008, deregulating the financial institutions and industry. So he's got a lot of credit and credibility. He's a very good speaker. And I decided, yesterday you heard about 11 minutes of the New York Attorney General, Tish James. A lot of people like that. So I'm going to give you all 10 minutes of Robert Reich off the cuff, warning his institution not to bend the knee to the Trump regime and inspiring the rest of us to come together in solidarity. I give you the whole 10 minutes of Robert Reich from yesterday. You can skip ahead if you want, but if you like this, like I do, here it is in its context. And sorry, you do hear some other voices who were at the rally where he was speaking, being just a little bit, but I think they go away as he keeps talking.
Not only as Berkeley students and administrators and faculty and this community, but as communities of learning across America, it confirmed our commitment to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom to learn what we wanted to learn. The emergency right now is almost directly upon us. On Friday, as you know, one of the best, if not the best, private university in America, or the world, got a set of demands from the Trump regime that if it accepted that best or near best private university in America or the world would have lost its integrity, its own freedom, its own ability to govern itself. It would have succumbed and surrendered to the Trump regime. And what it did instead is it said no. Now, if the best or near best private university in America or the world can say no, if it can defy the Trump regime, even at the expense, at a big expense, and I'll get into this in a moment, if it can do that, then the best public university in America and the world must do the same. And make no error or make no mistake, that letter from the Trump regime is coming. It may come today or tomorrow or this week. It is coming to the Berkeley administration, and it will have a list of demands. And Berkeley, if it is going to maintain its integrity and its independence, and it must say no. This is an issue that goes beyond issues of just academic freedom. It goes to the core meaning of freedom in this country. It goes to the essence of what we all believe about America. Because if the Trump regime can dictate to any university the terms on which its faculty or its students or its administrators or anybody in this community is going to function, then there is no limit to what that regime will do. You cannot appease a tyrant. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, in 1939 tried to appease a tyrant. Guess what? It didn't work. Columbia University tried to appease a tyrant. Guess what? It didn't work. Some law firms tried to appease a tyrant. It doesn't work because you're feeding the tyrant. You're feeding tyranny. The only way to deal with a tyrant is to deny the tyrant the ability to be tyrannical. Tyranny cannot exist unless people submit to it. And we are not going to submit. Now, it's easy to say this, but to actually resist, to renounce, to say no, is costly. Columbia University and Harvard and other private universities that are resisting or have tried to resist certainly are facing major costs. But let me be very, very clear. The costs are worth it. It takes courage. It takes courage to resist tyranny. Courage is contagious. After Harvard stood up to the tyrant, guess what? Columbia, that had been surrendering to that tyrant, that Columbia just said, no, we have stopped surrendering. We now feel courage. And there are a few courageous law firms that have said no to the tyrant, and they are summoning the courage of other law firms. The test of this country is our ability to say no to tyranny and arbitrary authority, to say no to somebody who does not have any sense of limits in terms of power or need for subjugation, need for dominance, need to put other people down. This university is going to be at the lead of American public universities in saying to that tyrant, no. I want to thank you all. But more importantly, I want to thank you for your courage. Not just today. Again, it's easy today. But solidarity, the kind of solidarity we are feeling by being all together, solidarity breeds courage. One of the reasons that so many people in this country are afraid right now, one of the reasons that so many international students are afraid to say what they think, one of the reasons that so many people are afraid that they might be even abducted and sent to a prison in El Salvador is because they feel a lack of solidarity. They feel that they are vulnerable. They feel that they and their liberties can be taken at any time. And they're right if there is no solidarity. If we are not protecting them, if we are not helping them, if we are not looking out for them. So I thank you for your courage. I ask you to help Berkeley and its administration do the right thing. I ask you to help international students understand that we have their backs. Because if anybody is intimidated, if anybody feels they cannot speak or learn or teach or do what they want to do in terms of their intellectual life, none of us is safe. The truth is not safe. And I will say this about the administration's abduction of people without any due process, without any trial, without any judge overseeing it. If somebody can be abducted in the United States and sent to a brutal prison in another land, none of us is safe. The next days and months and years will demand from all of us great courage and solidarity. Be prepared. Thank you.
All right, there you go. Robert Reich yesterday in Berkeley, and I thought I'd give you that in its full context. Let me know if you like that, or if it's annoying to fast forward through if you don't like it. But as we descend into chaos and fascism and to this authoritarian state, I like to remind people of these kinds of moments, these kind of speeches that well-spoken people with integrity and credibility are giving all across the land openly and publicly, and that is the only way we can maintain our safety as solidarity. And I fully agree with that, which is why I'm so glad to have yours here in the stand-up community. All right, well, I've got some other sound for you, just a few more clips. Here's Elizabeth Warren was on CNBC yesterday. She's explaining why Trump illegally firing the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, would wreck the economy and take the U.S. down a fast track towards dictatorship. And by the way, he cannot legally fire him. If he does it anyway, and no one stops him, the economy is not the only thing that'll be destroyed. But here it is.
Let's start on Powell. Sure. Just as a reminder, so Congress gives the Fed the authority. Can the president terminate, not that he said he's going to do this, but can he terminate Powell's chairmanship earlier than his ended term?
No.
Under no circumstance?
Nope.
So that's not a concern for you?
Well, I thought we were talking about legally, right? But this is a president who has shown himself willing to violate laws every place he goes, including willing to violate the Constitution of the United States. So that obviously puts things a little more in play than we ever would have guessed. But I really want to make a pitch here for a second about the importance of Powell staying in his job. Look,
and it's unusual coming from you. You're very critical of him.
I have tangled with him on a regular basis about both regulations and interest rates. But understand this. If Chairman Powell can be fired by the President of the United States, it will crash the markets in the United States. The infrastructure that keeps this stock market strong, and therefore a big part of our economy strong, and therefore a big part of the world economy strong, is the idea that the big pieces move independent of the politics, that somebody is making her best decisions economically and independently. We understand that if the New York Stock Exchange, if interest rates in the United States are subject to a president who just wants to wave his magic wand, this doesn't distinguish us then from any other two-bit dictatorship around the world where everyone knows what your big investment risk is. Will that dictator wake up in the morning and have a tummy ache and decide to cause this problem or favor that friend? That's why we need to strengthen the infrastructure.
But I know you're...
All right, well, thought that was an interesting explainer, and I think this is also an interesting explainer. This is Roger Parloff. He's a journalist and senior editor at Lawfare, well-respected authority on legal matters. So he was on CNN yesterday with a woman I think is really one of the best over there. Her name is Audie Cornish. I've been on television with her. She's a former NPR host, and I think she's doing great work over there. Anyway, I thought this was a good almost 3 minutes that would help you understand the legal issue around specifically the due process criminal justice matter of Abrego Garcia. Here it is.
But let's talk about the two documents, one through ICE, right, in terms of chronicling who he was, and another from this anti-gang unit, I believe, in Prince George's County.
That's right.
What did you find that they said when they categorized him?
Well, the two are a little inconsistent, but the The important one is the one that was released yesterday. And what it really is double hearsay, as we would say. It's a detective who wasn't brought to court, never testified, saying what somebody allegedly told him, and that person is a confidential informant, and we don't know anything about him. So it's double hearsay as to him.
So a confidential informant says something to someone in this unit, and then it also comes down to the hat?
Yeah, so the only thing that the detective observed himself was he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and some sort of hoodie. The hoodie had some sort of insignia that one of the officers called indicative of Hispanic gang culture, not even a particular gang. And so it all came down to the detective also said he spoke to some confidential informant who had been reliable in the past, and that person identified him as a high-ranking member of MS-13, a clique called the Westerns.
Right, which when you looked into it in the government, it says Westerns don't even operate really in that state.
That's right. They're in Brentwood, Long Island, and he's never lived in New York.
Okay, so we have a confidential informant. We have this officer. Neither appeared in court, and I'm not saying they should. It's immigration. It's not exactly the same due process situation. However, when you tried to find this officer, or at least look into that part of it, what did you learn? Yeah,
it wasn't me. His original lawyer, after this happened, who seemed to be sort of shocked at the time in 2019, tried to track down the officer and was told that he had been suspended. The lawyer tried to speak to other people in the gang unit, and they refused. Just recently, this week, in fact, a new Republic reporter, Greg Sargent, tracked down, figured out who the detective was. He was actually not just suspended, but indicted, and later pled guilty to a misconduct charge that was unrelated. It was leaking confidential information about an interrogation, about a police investigation to a commercial sex
So
worker.
In a way, like our whole portrait of him as described by the White House is in fact informed by somebody who was indicted for misconduct.
Yeah, it's a double hearsay stemming from a document written by somebody indicted for misconduct.
Right. The other.
Wow. I thought that was a great explainer. I also like that he gave credit to Greg Sargent for that reporting. Really good journalism right there, and a great explainer. What did I tell you? See, that was on CNN with Audi Kardish, and I think she's great. Audi or Audi? I don't know why I'm saying Audi. That's really insulting. Audi is how it's pronounced. And here is Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy, I think is how it's pronounced. Here he is on the Senate floor for about a minute yesterday talking about the Trump Supreme Court battle that really is not the crisis. He says the crisis is here right now.
Most of the time, there is not a singular moment when the executive dramatically seizes power. There's not normally a brazen attempt to burn down the Parliament building. No, instead, democracies die when gradually, often quietly and methodically over time, the structures that hold the executive accountable for corruption, for thievery, for wrongdoing are dismantled. There are 4 institutions that the regime attacks, and attacks relentlessly until those structures of accountability are so disintegrated that even though elections continue to happen, the same party or the same person wins power election after election. And those 4 institutions are the press, the legal profession, universities, and the business community. If you degrade or co-opt these 4 institutions, you never need to have a high-stakes fight with the top court in your country.
So well said. So well said. The guy is a student of history for sure. And I'm going to keep reading this and reminding folks. I've read it at the Hangout. I'm sure I've read it here on the podcast. But if I haven't, I saw this online. Mara Quint shared this from someone named Felipe de la Hoz, who writes, "One thing I wish people understood about authoritarianism is life often looks more or less the same. Troops aren't marching down the street every day. People go to restaurants, have their office jobs, but everyone knows that stepping out of line, even slightly, can derail your life with no recourse. A very small number of people comparatively will be grabbed off the street. Most businesses and universities won't have accounts frozen and offices raided. Publications won't necessarily be outright shut down, but everyone knows that it's a possibility and we'll all act accordingly. Yeah, I like that a lot as well, and wanted to read you that and share that because Chris Murphy and others, we're screaming, this is how it happens. This is what it looks like. And I think most importantly, it is not always the same. Each country in different times, each society with different generations, it looks differently. And we've got to be open-minded and creative enough, I think, to realize what it looks like in America in 2025 with social media and AI and cable news networks and everybody echoing each other. So that's why I think it's really important to support independent media like this, because damn, that was a good recap that I just produced for you of the news with audio clips. And guess what, mofos? I'm not even done because I still have my conversation with David Cay Johnston coming up. But I also like to leave you on a laugh here at the end as we head into a serious conversation. So let's go over to the late night comedians. Here's Jimmy Kimmel on ABC. And while you do hear Trump's voice, it's only for about 10 seconds, and it's pretty bad and embarrassing for him. I hope you can take it.
Trump understands that the story of King Midas is a cautionary tale. It's like everything turned into gold. This sounds fantastic. Oh, no, but then he touched his wife and kids, and they turned into gold also. He's like, even better. Trump got a visit from the Prime Minister of Italy today. He had them bring in lunch from the Olive Garden to make her feel at home. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni flew in to try to talk some sense into him on behalf of the EU. They had a joint press conference, as Trump likes to do with other world leaders, where he turned the focus to immigration and showed off his vast knowledge of other lands.
You know, they released jails, Georgia, from all over the world, and released them, not just South America, all over the world, the Congo and Africa. Many, many people come from the Congo. I don't know what that is, but they came from the Congo.
You know, Congo. You know, like, come on, shake your body, baby. Do that Congo, you know? No? No? Congo number 5? When is someone going to show that man a map? This White House is running like a well-soiled machine. Remember when the FBI announced that their agents were working around the clock to release those unredacted Jeffrey Epstein files? The first set of Jeffrey Epstein files that were unredacted were redacted. So then they said they had agents pulling all-nighters. They were told they're working uninterrupted to make this their number one priority. Well, that was like 3 weeks ago, and we still haven't seen anything. Trump, as you know, was a good pal of Jeffrey Epstein's, and so he was likely not thrilled to be asked about him during an interview with Fox Noticias en Español.
Sé que Judicial Watch está demandando para obtener acceso a los archivos relacionados con, por ejemplo, Jeffrey Epstein.
You'll be surprised to learn he took an El Paso on answering that question. He pleaded the Cinco. We are also still waiting for Trump to declassify those UFO files he promised he would release months ago. But we did get some pretty remarkable news from astronomers at the University of Cambridge who have located a planet which they believe may be showing signs of life. The planet, they're calling it K2-18b. They named it after one of Elon Musk's kids. But they've done repeated analysis of the atmosphere, and they suggest that an abundance of a molecule that on Earth has only one known source, which is living organisms such as marine algae, also known as sea scum, is there. So we may have found a new home for Ted Cruz. That's the good news.
And there you go, Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel Live last night. Very funny. Loved it. Now let's get to my conversation with David Cay Johnston, who, of course, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. He worked at the New York Times for, I think, like 17 years, where he covered tax policy. He is a professor now at Rochester Institute of Technology, and he is a best-selling author who has written several of my favorite books, including Perfectly Legal and Free Lunch. He's also written books on Donald Trump. He's interviewed Donald Trump. Donald Trump hates David Cay Johnston. Check him out at dcreport.org. You can support him there. Let's do it right now with David Cay Johnston. You can also watch this interview on YouTube right now, youtube.com/standupwithpete. Please go subscribe to that, and maybe you can catch the next one live. And there he is, David Cay Johnston. is joining me. He's everywhere. He's in high demand, so I'm so grateful, always grateful, when you do join me in front of a stone fireplace, I'm guessing in Western New York, where you live and teach.
Absolutely, and we have this stuff called pink Medina stone. It looks pretty brown and gray, but in the right lighting you can see that it's quite pink, which is unusual for rocks.
Oh, I bet it is unusual for rocks. I didn't know you were a geology person as well, but
certainly not.
Very little that you don't know a lot about. And I want to ask you, I want to try to get through as many things as I can with you in about 30 minutes today. So here we go. I've got a list, and I wanted to start with, this might sound hokey, but I wanted to just give you the first question to ask yourself, which is whatever you think is most important right now, because pretty much what I want to talk about, I'm sure. What do you think is the biggest kind of crisis point issue right now? Is that easy, or do you think it's just a myriad of all of them together? And go ahead.
2 months ago, Donald Trump declared himself to be our dictator. He didn't say, "I'm our dictator." What he did was post a bogus quote attributed to various people over time. Whatever he does to save America or to save the nation cannot be a violation of the law. And 3 days later, the White House, in multiple places, posted an image of Donald Trump with a regal crown on his head and the text, "Long live the king." Donald Trump is America's dictator. We are living under a dictatorship. What Trump is doing is consolidating his power and vanquishing sources of accountability. So he's eliminated almost all of the inspectors general. Those are the administrative people whose job is to look into the agencies. He has put into the Justice Department Pam Bondi, an utterly corrupt attorney, and Kash Patel, an ideologue with no competence to run that job. He has declared his desire to sweep Americans off the street and render them to a notorious death camp prison in El Salvador. He has ordered universities to bow down to him. Some haven't. He's ordered law firms to give millions and hundreds of millions of dollars collectively in free legal services to people he designates. We might call that extortion, and we should. So people need to be aware that the door on keeping your liberties is closing. And if you're a Trump supporter and you think he's going to go after people I don't like, I'm okay, you don't know anything about the history of authoritarianism. Among the first people the dictator will turn on are supporters who in any way don't do exactly what he says or fit a profile where he needs to terrify other people. We're under a dictatorship. We can still emerge from this a free people, but not if people bury their heads in the sand and not if they don't act. Now, I don't expect everybody, Pete, to be brave enough to stand up to Donald. So get behind people who are. That would be the thing to do.
What do you make of the resistance as it stands right now? I think one measure that you're seeing pretty clearly is this Bernie Sanders AOC tour, where they're drawing like tens of thousands of people in places that aren't highly populated, and what people do live there, they're often MAGA, they're Trumpers, and so they're in Idaho, they're in Montana, they're in Northern California, in a red area of California. A lot of people don't know a lot of conservative areas out there, as well as several other places. I guess they're just wrapping up the tour. But what do you make of the resistance? What do you make of Democrats, the electeds, in terms of the reaction to what you, sir, refer to as we're living under a dictatorship? What do you make of how we're handling it, how we're reacting to it?
I wouldn't overvalue these Bernie Sanders AOC rallies.
Shit's right on.
Journalists who are there, who talk to people in the audience, find that they are overwhelmingly Democrats or anti-Trump Republicans. And there's a new survey out that indicates that only about 1% of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump regret their vote, and the number is similar for independents. Turning people who were conned by Donald Trump, the greatest con artist in the history of the world, that's going to be the key. And I don't think that will happen, Pete. And I'm sorry I have to say this, but I don't think it's going to happen until there's real health and economic damage.
Right.
When a poor Republican Trump supporter finds out their child will die because of cuts to Medicaid, or grandma died prematurely for lack of insulin at a price she can afford. When people don't get their Social Security checks and are told, oh, that's too bad,
right,
that's when you're going to start to see a change. And Steve Bannon, Trump's former campaign manager and advisor, has said repeatedly, don't mess with Medicaid. It'll turn your supporters against you. Let's hope that he does, even though it's going to cause horrible results.
Sadly, I think you're probably right, but I would look at it as the trifecta of lose your job, lose your health insurance, lose your portfolio, your retirement portfolio, and let's not forget, pay more for everything on top of all that. That, sir, seems like a scenario that's not that unlikely, and that would be the perfect storm of kind of economic damage to certainly everybody. Obviously not the most affluent amongst us, but most Americans.
Well, even the big Wall Street firms are saying that it's very likely we're going to go into a recession. And the people who lose jobs in a recession are not what's called the primary labor force. It's the tertiary labor force, the people on the edges who have work when good times are good or decent and lose their jobs when it isn't. Although in this case, we're seeing lots of people who were in the primary workforce, like scientists and lawyers at the federal government, lose their jobs. But absolutely, the economics of this are going to matter. And just let me have a moment on tariffs.
Yeah, let's do tariff.
A tariff is not just a tax on imported goods. This is the most crucial thing to understand.
Yeah.
A tariff is a tax. It's a tax paid by the consumers at the end of the day. But here's what happens. It allows domestic manufacturers to raise their prices. So imagine that you own Pete Dominick cars and you sell your cars out of the factory wholesale at 10 grand each and you make a $1 grand profit. Trump raises the price of the competing Chinese car to with a tariff to $16,000.
Right.
You're not going to sell your cars anymore for $10,000. You're going to raise your price to $15,000. Your profit's going to be $6,000 a car. Now, because the prices are higher and more people can't afford a car, you're going to sell maybe half as many cars. You're still much better off. You'll have 3 times as much profit from this. Donald Trump's tariffs, and I don't think he understands this, but they are a scheme to raise prices and enrich the super rich who own manufacturing businesses at the expense of ordinary Americans. And that's a fundamental to his complete ignorance of economics, even though he was given, didn't earn, but was given an economics degree by an Ivy League school, Penn.
It would seem that most Republicans who are sycophants of his or intimidated by him or whatever are also completely ignorant on how economics works, even those who used to know how it worked or at least had opinions as to how it worked. Then there's a few Republican senators who have been consistent in terms of being anti-tariff their whole life, like Rand Paul. But one thing you're hearing, I just wanted to get kind of succinct but poignant answer on this, is that this whole trade war could have the effect. You've seen the Commerce Secretary and the rest of these wallflowers, that weird Treasury Secretary. It's going to rebuild manufacturing plants in America, and we're going to be back to the old days. We're going to have manufacturing here in America. And the thing that you don't have to be smart to understand is we don't have 3D manufacturing power plants builders. Like, it takes years to build a plant. And by the way, it felt like the chips and what the legislation passed by Democrats was building actual manufacturing plants for batteries and other renewable things. And they cut the investment on that. And they think they're going to bring iPhone manufacturing plants. They're not going to build these. They would take years. So this whole idea that the trade war is going to create America of the old, make America great again, and have all of these manufacturing plants like we used to from where you live in Rochester now, where I grew up in Syracuse, there's no possible way that's going to happen, right? With almost every sector, I would imagine. Maybe you're going to point to one or two. You could cherry pick this or that.
Well, and especially it's not going to happen because of, and I want to reintroduce a phrase to the American lexicon, Donald Trump is a flip-flopper. We're going to have tariffs. Oh, we're not going to have tariffs.
How dare
we're going to have this tariff. No, we're going to have that tariff. No one's going to invest billions of dollars when Donald Trump doesn't have a clear plan, and he flip-flops and he grants exemptions. He granted an exemption in one case on a tariff to a firm that donated $1 million to a cause that he wanted, one of his political funds. He's exempted Apple's iPhones and Google's Pixel phones from the tariffs and laptops from China. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate goods move back and forth. A part made in Michigan goes across to Windsor, Ontario, where some work is done on it. It comes back to Pennsylvania. It's then sent up to another Ontario factory. It comes back and goes to New York, and then it goes to Brampton, west of Toronto, where the finished vehicle is made, and it's then shipped into the United States. These are very complex supply chains that were built up over years and are highly efficient.
Right.
And people are not going to change those things without a lot of effort. And it isn't like we don't have manufacturing. Joe Biden added over 700,000 manufacturing jobs in 4 years. Donald cost us manufacturing jobs. About 1 in 10 American workers, by the broadest measure of workers, that includes people who just work part-time or seasonally, works in a factory. And there aren't lots of people clamoring to work in factories, and absolutely not for the near starvation wages that you would earn in China for, as Lutwick, the Commerce Secretary, put it, putting screws into iPhones.
Those people are killing themselves. They have a suicide epidemic in those factories.
Yes.
I feel like I've seen some good investigative reporting on how horrific the working conditions are, to the point that they work so hard and long, and it's so monotonous that they actually go crazy and take their lives sometimes.
Underlying this, Pete, is that Donald, despite his degree in economics, doesn't understand economics.
Yeah, wow.
We have become incredibly good as a species at creating wealth. We're not very good at distributing wealth, but boy, do we know how to create wealth. Donald is a mercantilist. Right. Mercantilism was the prevailing economic theory before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776 and explained market economies. Donald believes that if you, Pete, have $1, then I don't have the dollar, and I should take that dollar from
he's
you,
got a
because
bully.
that's the only way I can get ahead.
Yeah.
And that's why the British would routinely, with pirates, go after Spanish gold in the Caribbean. It's what prompted the Spanish king and queen to send the Armada to defeat the English, to stop the stealing of their gold. Along came a storm, and they weren't able to invade England. But this notion that there's a sort of fixed amount of wealth, and every dollar you have is a dollar you must have taken from me or deprived me of, is what drives Donald's absolutely crazy understanding of economics. And the Republicans you're seeing who are saying, we have to go through a little pain to get to a better place, absolute nonsense. These are people who are being willfully blind to the reality that Donald Trump is bringing our economy down. And think of this scenario with the tariffs. What if the EU, which has more people than the United States.
They're going to remake markets because of the way where people live. EU works with other markets, and they start working with China. They bring in, Asia and Australia.
What if the EU, the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand created a free trade zone that excludes the United States? That would be deep trouble for us. What if they allowed China and India, even on a limited basis, into that free trade zone? And here's another one to think about. One of the biggest subsidies Americans have is the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency. There's roughly 1 trillion literal paper dollars out there that are outside of the U.S. And so long as they don't come back to the U.S., that's a gift to us of all that money. And if the EU is able to make the euro the world reserve currency, it's not going to be the yuan. The renminbi is under the control of a communist regime that uses capitalism but doesn't fundamentally believe in capitalism.
Right.
But the euro could become the new world reserve currency. That will make us worse off. Donald doesn't know anything about anything.
He doesn't care.
In economics.
He doesn't.
He also doesn't care. What matters is what the phrase I always use is Donald creates his own reality.
Yeah.
Professor Timothy Snyder at Yale has a variation he's developed of that. Donald lives in a fictional world, and he just rewrites his narrative as needed.
If markets were to recreate or reunify the way that you described, don't you think it would be a smart investment for Americans to invest in our own tiny house builders? Because our houses are way too big. And now that we're going to be living in mud huts when the rest of the world ignores us. I saw yesterday Goldman Sachs had an analysis that we stand to lose $90 billion. I don't know how much money that is in the grand scheme of things in tourism, because I don't know how much we bring in. But just I wonder if you have anything to say about the loss of tourism dollars as a result of not only the trade war, but our behavior. And there's some people that are ideologically don't want to support America, but also just the idea that people, even athletes like Olympians and World Cup players, might want to come here because they get stuck in purgatory at JFK. Like our entire system seems to be breaking down. What do you think about the future of tourism in America?
It's very bad, and we're already seeing the results of that. In fact, I got an email a couple of days ago from Icelandic Air offering me a flight to various cities in Europe for $350.
Oh, pass it along, sir.
And
pass it along.
And that includes a free stopover in Reykjavik, coming or going. And by the way, if you're going to go to Europe, try Reykjavik, because Iceland is absolutely fascinating. I've been there in the middle of winter. I've been there in the summer. I want to go again.
Oh, God, I cannot get the image of David Cay Johnston on the hot spring out of my mind. But go ahead. What do you think about how this affects tourism?
I was in New York City earlier this week. LaGuardia Airport, I couldn't believe how unbusy it was. And I talked to some of the skycaps who said, yeah, business is way down.
Wow.
The planes, United Airlines just announced that they're going to retire a whole bunch of jumbo jets, 757s, 767s, and even some of the 777s, because there's no demand. And the only reason a lot of these flights are still going and why you can get bargains right now is because they're empty seats and they want to fill those seats with any marginal revenue they can get. But if you want to come to the U.S., yeah, you run the risk of what will happen to you. We've had people at the border, instead of being turned away if we don't approve you, instead of being marched over, you've got to buy a ticket on this airline and we're going to sit here with you until the plane goes and leaves. They've been arresting people and holding them. In one case, a Canadian woman for 12 days. So they're discouraging in the most serious way. Apparently, the value of homes in some of the snowbird communities around Vegas and Phoenix is falling already. And of course, if you own a home in Northern Virginia or Southern Maryland, I hope you don't have to sell right now because so many tens of thousands of federal workers have been let go or will be let go that house prices have to fall.
I've heard about that, the DMV, as it's referred to, suffering because so many of those people are federal workers that are losing their jobs.
Delmarva.
I got to ask you about the threats to colleges and universities, as much about this as anybody, from a legal standpoint, from an academic standpoint, and from an economic standpoint in terms of the federal government's investments in universities and colleges. I saw you doing an interview somewhere in preparation to talk to you, and you referred to the investments the federal government makes in colleges and universities as taxpayer investments into science. And I thought that was a perfect way to put it. So where do you want to start here on the tactic, maybe on the tactic that the Trump administration is using and why they're pressuring colleges and universities?
World War II, the watershed event in human history, made a huge awareness of how important science is to winning wars and to defending our freedom. So starting in 1946 with the GI Bill, the War Orphans Act, which I went to college under, and science grants, more than half the economic growth in the United States since the end of World War II is because of taxpayer investments in basic science. Companies don't do basic science, they do applied science. And the reason you have a GPS in your car that will tell you how to get to a location you've never been to is taxpayer investments that were then applied by companies to create that technology. And so when you're cutting science research, you're deciding to be poorer in the future. You're also deciding by stopping a whole bunch of grants, cancer research, kidney disease research, brain research, Alzheimer's research. They've killed subjects that are in process, not saying we're not going to give you any more money, finish up your work, but killing them. That's going to make us poorer and less healthy. Now, on the other front, it is one of the most disgraceful events in American history that Columbia University bowed down to Donald Trump. If Columbia University, which has an endowment of over $13 billion and could have made up the loss of the $400 million of federal money with 3% of its endowment, and which could have, of course, sued to say you can't do this to us, and we don't know the outcome of litigation like that. But had Columbia stood up to Donald Trump and said, no, we have free speech, we have freedom in America, you're not our dictator, I believe they could have raised that $400 million in a week.
They could have raised that on a GoFundMe with the with the alumni network alone. Columbia could probably raise at least half that, if not all of that. But the larger point, to when you're done making fun of the Ivy Leaguers for not standing up to it, Harvard did. So continue. Sorry.
Well, so Columbia bowed down, as a number of law firms have. And Donald says, oh, they call me and they say, oh, sir, thank you for doing this. Thank you. We appreciate it, which is, of course, a complete nonsense fiction by Donald. Now, Harvard, which has the biggest endowment, over $50 billion, and is at risk for about apparently $9 billion of federal funding, they're standing up to Trump. They're fighting back. There's now been a coalition created by the Big Ten colleges in their sports area that if you attack our academic freedom, we will act as one. We'll follow the NATO rule. An attack on one is an attack on all. And so it's going to be tougher because of the cowardice of the trustees and administration of Columbia University. But we're seeing pushback. That is incredibly important. We're seeing some law firms saying, no, we are not going to give you $100 million of free services for causes or groups that you want. We're not going to submit to extortion. So there needs to be more standing up to Donald Trump. And hopefully, frankly, Donald will continue to defy court orders, because the Supreme Court is not going to stand for a president who says, you have no authority, I'll do whatever I damn well please. If they do, then what's the point of having a Supreme Court?
That's a good question. Let me come back to the courts and the court orders, because I just want to ask you another general question, which is, I love one of the things I've always loved about you and that you've always taught us, just by living your life, role modeling behavior, DCJ, which is you read a lot of international media from Israel to Europe to Asia. And you also up here make appearances on international media in all those places, the Arab world and more. So I got to ask you, how has you tweeted, or rather Blue Sky or whatever it's called, you said the tone of the questions have changed in international media. And I thought that, what are you talking about?
Yeah, just this morning I did 2 overseas shows, and the questions from London and the Middle East were very different, as were the questions from Cairo the day before. When Trump first came into office, it was all, isn't this really great? Trump says he's going to do all these great things. Now the questions are ominous. They're skeptical. They're, what the heck happened to the United States? And I was on a panel a few minutes ago on Al Jazeera with 2 other people, a journalist and a Harvard professor, and we all agreed America is living in a dictatorship now, even if people don't recognize it. When I brought up 2 months ago, when Donald declared his dictatorship on the same channel, I got pushback. Not getting any pushback about that anymore. The rest of the world recognizes what's going on. And don't miss that Holman Jenkins, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm not a fan of Holman Jenkins' work at all, but he ran a piece last week that Donald Trump needs to be removed. That didn't run without the approval of the 2 top editors of the editorial page at the Journal, who are, boy, are they on the far right in their views of the world, and probably it was probably run by Rupert Murdoch or his son Lachlan. This was a clear signal, and the business community is beginning to recognize that their thought that bad things are going to happen to people we don't care about, we're going to get rich. That's not how it's going, and that's not how it's going to go. We're going to be poorer, not wealthier, if Donald Trump isn't stopped, and that's the point Holman Jenkins was making. Unfortunately, if you remove Donald Trump, you get J.D. Vance, who's young, vigorous, and just as slippery, dishonest, and anti-democracy as Donald Trump.
The only excuse that could be given for all those captains of industry and people who think they know way more than us about economics and politics is that Trump didn't crash the economy in Trump 1. He won't do it in Trump 2. And obviously he did because of COVID, but without COVID, he gave us a tax cut. So all these people, these decision makers, these influencers, these bankers and captains of industry and media pundits all said it's not going to be worse, and it wasn't that bad. It was good for us, for rich people. They got a huge tax cut. That's the only way I can see that they could have looked at it and said, but now they're seeing he's insane. They're recognizing he's an insane, crazy person and doesn't care about anybody. And hey, like Chat GPT made up his dumb poster and his entire economic policy, and nobody likes it in the entire world, and no one can defend it in any policy circle across the political spectrum, and they've got to realize that. And they know that everything is flashing red because this guy's insane. What do you think of my interpretation?
Pete, I think you're spot on about that. Now, November of 26 is a long ways off. There's a lot of time for Trump to try and make sure we don't have a free and fair election, that black people, older people, immigrants, students will have difficulty voting. And you don't have to prevent very many people from voting to get the results you want. But a lot of Republicans are now openly talking about not a minor change in Congress where the Democrats win control of the House, but a wholesale change, possibly the biggest change in history. And so we're not without tools to resist Trump and to stop him. But the longer this goes on, the weaker the response, the more difficulty there will be, and the smaller the chance that we will not become an authoritarian society.
How come you, unlike your colleagues or in academia, Tim Snyder and Jason Stanley, both of which I've interviewed several times, how come you don't go to Canada? How worried are you about what is happening in this country when it comes to deporting now homegrowns? You look to me like a homegrown.
Yeah. When Timothy Snyder and Jason Stanley and a third professor whose expertise is the modern history of Eastern Europe, therefore tyranny, announced they're all going to the University of Toronto, I wrote a column at dcreport.org called I'm Not Leaving. And I explained why I'm not going. And back in 2016, when Trump lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College, I explained to my family, my 8 kids and my 5 grandchildren, that if Donald could find an excuse to take me off the streets, he would. He said he hates me more than any other journalist. And I said, I don't cower. We're not going to back down. And here's what you do if something happens to me. I said, I think it's highly unlikely. He's got bigger targets than a 76-year-old journalist turned professor. But it's entirely possible. And if it happens, you cannot act out of fear of what will happen. That's the worst thing. That's how dictators get power. You have to stand up to them. You have to do what's right and accept that there may be terrible consequences. And let me be clear about this. Every dictatorship that I've studied, the authoritarian experts like Sarah Kendzior, whom I've interviewed, dictatorships eventually lead to firing squads or their functional equivalent. Okay, if I'm end of my life as a firing squad, that's the end of my life. But I'm not going to cower. And I don't expect everybody to be that way. I understand that. But stand behind the people who are in front, standing up to Trump. Donate to those things. Talk to people about what's happening. And once the economic damage leads to things like children dying because of Medicaid and insulin going back to $1,000 a month and people having to ration insulin and therefore shorten their lives, that is killing people, we may begin to see some separation here from the people Donald has conned into thinking he's their friend. When you get rid of, as a practical matter, he has gotten rid of job safety inspection. If you're a blue-collar worker, how does that help you? It puts you at danger. You're going to lose an arm, a leg, or your life.
Right. Let me just ask you here at the end about these court orders and the Trump administration's defiance of them. You got a district court judge, you got the circuit court judges 3-0, and then you got the Supreme Court 9-0. And somehow they've twisted it into, the Supreme Court decided for us. We're focused a lot on this Abrego Garcia, but you could look at 60 Minutes did that piece where the vast majority of the 200 or so that they sent had not been accused of or convicted of a crime. So what do you make of what we're seeing play out right now? The Trump administration defiance of these court orders. Some people call it a constitutional crisis. You've already said we're living in a dictatorship, but specifically everybody's looking at this as some kind of a threshold moment. What are your thoughts?
It absolutely is. When Hitler came to power, the Weimar Republic conservatives and business leaders said, if we make Hitler chancellor, we can control him. And they quickly discovered they couldn't. And the same is true of Donald. You can't control him. So the first big incident, the burning of books in Berlin, was at the Institute of Sexual Studies. These are perverts because they're studying human sexuality. They went after labor leaders. They went after communists or people they thought were communists. And what you're seeing now is the same thing. Trump has picked people he can demonize, supposed gang members, even though many of them have no gang affiliation, have never been arrested. I think 60 Minutes found 75% had no convictions. And he's rendering them without any due process or trial. And we know of at least one, and it appears at least 3 of these people have no business having been arrested. And if Donald thumbs his nose at the court, the Supreme Court is going to have to, some way or another in a new decision, pull back from its 2023 immunity decision that said anything a sitting president does as an official act is beyond review by anyone except for impeachment by Congress and conviction by the Senate. The courts are going to be incredibly crucial here. And some Trump judges have already stood up to the Trump administration because they care about the rule of law. But we've also seen judges who weren't Trump appointees who've turned out to have rubber spines. One of the most important issues in litigation is going to be which cases go forward and how well they were framed. It matters enormously. It's inside baseball for lawyers. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've been a professor of law for the last 15 years, 16 years. How cases are framed is crucial to how they end up before the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is not going to stand for Donald Trump saying, I can ignore you. Now, one of the problems will be, of course, that let's say that Judge James Boasberg, when he calls in the Trump lawyers, who he's suggested are in criminal contempt, or the whole administration is in criminal contempt, he says, Mr. Dominic, as the lawyer for the Justice Department here today, I find you in contempt. Bailiff, put him in a cell. He'll go to the cell at the moment, but guess what? The marshals actually work for the executive branch, and Pam Bondi will place a phone call and say, hey, let lawyer Pete Dominic out. This is a completely lawless government. It has no respect for the rule of law. And we're going to need some clear court decisions, particularly framed in a way that will enable Trump Republicans on Capitol Hill to separate themselves. And if there's anything the politicians want, it's to get reelected until they're ready to retire. And so to the degree that the members of the House and Senate in 2026 fear they will be turned out, they'll do a lot of things, including breaking partially with Donald.
In a dictatorship, as you've described it, we don't have free and fair elections. So do you think we'll have free and fair midterm elections?
I think the litigation you're already seeing underway about people's right to vote is absolutely critical to what's going to happen in the 2026 elections, because those are not presidential elections. The differences in the rules among the states are very important. We have very good news in Wisconsin. They didn't elect someone who would have made sure that union members, black people, old people, et cetera, would have a hard time voting. Trump has issued this executive order claiming control of elections. I'm sorry. No, the Constitution says the states are in charge of their elections unless Congress passes a law to the contrary. And there isn't such a law. He doesn't have the authority. But there are going to be great efforts to block people from voting, to not count their votes, basically to steal the election. And Donald in so many ways has signaled this. Make sure you're registered. Get other people to register. But most importantly, in November of 26, take the day off, take the day before off. Get people to the polls. We had 13 million fewer votes in 2024 and 2020.
Yeah.
If you count population growth, we should have had 17 million more votes. Why didn't those people vote? Political scientists haven't filed their reports yet, but I expect that when we begin to see them, hopefully sometime this year, they're going to say a lot of people stayed home because they went, Trump isn't going to win because he's unpopular. The news media keeps telling me he isn't going to win. I'm guilty of that. And the economy's doing well. I'm making more money than I ever did because the wages of people in the bottom half were rising faster than the average, which hadn't happened for 50 years or almost 50 years. And so people stayed home because they were satisfied. That's what I expect they're going to find. You got to vote. At the end of the day, voting matters. And if Donald loses control of the House and if he loses the Senate as well, it's game over for what he's up to. He can be tied up by Congress very effectively. But just winning the House is a part-way measure. There needs to be a big change in the Senate as well.
You were just the man I wanted to talk to today about all of these issues. I'm so grateful, as always, to you for joining us. So what are you plugging besides dcreport.org? That's where you can find them. You're posting mostly on Blue Sky commentary and links and so on. Where else? Anything?
Well, somebody stole my credentials somehow for my Twitter X account.
Oh,
and
no.
I haven't been able to get them back. And I keep writing to Twitter, and they just send me a form saying you're not the person who owns this account.
Whatever.
And one has to wonder if this was a deliberate rather than something foul from the outside. But here'd be my number one thing to think about. RIT is one of the top 100 universities in America. We're producing enormous numbers of first-rate STEM graduates. Plus, we have arts. So I really think of us as a STEAM school: science, technology, arts, mathematics, and engineering. And what we don't have are enough young women. So if you have a high school or junior high school girl who's good at math, science, biology, think a lot about going to RIT, because we only have 30% of our students, maybe 35% are women, and lots of opportunities and a great faculty there, really great faculty, and a very upbeat view of the world by students, because they understand they're on the cutting edge of where we will be going in the future unless Donald succeeds in shutting down science.
So you're plugging, when I gave you the opportunity to plug, you plugged Rochester Institute of Technology. Very impressive.
Absolutely.
Very impressive.
Going to have our 200th anniversary in 2029. And it's the best run organization I've ever worked for, better run than the New York Times, the LA Times, Reuters, even Syracuse, and the University of Spoiled Children. I'm sorry, the University of Southern California.
I'm going to send them. I'll send them this clip. I hope they give you everything, an extra bonus, or whatever that means. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you for joining me, sir. Always great to have you. Really appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Take care.
Well, there you have it, everybody. David Cay Johnston. Isn't he one of the best guests ever? We were live on YouTube yesterday. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/standupwithpete. Go subscribe to substack.com/standupwithpete while you're on the internet. And thank you for listening today. You can subscribe and pay and support the podcast. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Anytime you want, you can pay more if you'd like, and I am so grateful to all of those of you who do. And thanks to everybody who came to hang out last night. Check me out tomorrow with Christian Finnegan, Saturdays with Christian. That's all I've got for you today. John Carroll. Oh, wait, I forgot. I'm going to debut the whole song from Gareth Sever from last night, and then we'll end with John Carroll performing as well. But Gareth writes these in the moment and improvises them based on what happened. And Tina Winsett last night's hangout admitted that we were talking about animals that we've accidentally killed with our cars, and she said she once killed an owl who she came around the corner and it was eating some roadkill, and it was so he included that. He included the point that Michael Ian Black referred to me as a former comedian in his otherwise wonderful Substack piece about our night together with Indivisible and several other things that occurred. So you might need a little bit of that context, but still, he's just great. This is fun. I hope it takes you back to the moment if you were there, and if you weren't, this is what you missed. Go subscribe and support Gareth. See him live, buckets and boards. Here he is.
All right. This one's all over the place.
Okay.
Tina hit a deer going 40. She'd never hit an animal before, see. Oh, except that one time she hit an owl in its prime, and I imagine that owl might have survived if Tina'd brought that owl to a doctor who was also an owl, with whom that owl could feel recognized. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody needs their own personal Van Hollen to seek you out and make sure you're seen. Please start doing something that actually means something needs to change, and soon. Maybe Tina could take a quick drive through up to D.C. and knock out a few of those nefarious assholes that are total buffoons. Oh, everything is pure chaos. If you feel like me, you feel so lost. There is one basic reality that's true, and that's that Pete Dominic's comedy career is through. Former comedian, it's time for him to say that's what I am. His days of comedy are clearly past. Hang up your spinner hat and say goodnight at last.
Oh, it was so good, Gareth. Thank you so much. Buckets and Boards. Go support him. Go follow him on social media. And I should put links to his work every day at the end. I will today, and I'll try to repeat it every day as I do John Carroll's work. John also sang for us. He is a pre-written song, of course, but he kind of just, improvised and wings it. And he's still so great, and it still sounds good, even on Zoom. Here he is.
It was in American Folkways.
Like you
that's what they, It's gonna rain, children. Lord gonna send the water from Zion. No, it's gonna raise the heavens up high. It's gonna rain. It's gonna rain. Well, now, God laid a hand on his throne. The angels in the heaven began to moan. He said, go down, angels, and stir up a flood. Strike the sun from the sky, change the moon into blood. Come back, angels, and bar the door. I believe in time there'll be no more. Tell me, great God, when it started to rain, the women and the children began to scream. They've been rattling at the window and banging at the door, saying, Brother Noah, can you take on more? Noah said, no, sorry, my friend, 'cause God got the keys and you can't come in. It's gonna rain, children. Lord gonna send the water from Zion. You know it's gonna raise heavens up high. It's gonna rain. It's gonna rain. Well, now, rain 40 days, 40 nights without stopping. Noah was worried. The rain kept dropping. He sent out a raven and he sent out a dove. The Lord of my Lord kept coming from above. Tell me, great God, whence you seek, or where we couldn't find land to rest our feet. Although the wind did blow, the ark did rock, Noah couldn't find no place to dock. Well, God slipped down and he whispered low. He told brother Noah where he wanted him to go. He said, look, brother Noah, the rain done stopped, and parked this jitney on a mountaintop. He showed brother Noah a rainbow sign. Showed brother Noah a rainbow sign and said it won't be a flood but a fire next time. It's gonna rain, children. Lord gonna send the water from Zion. You know it's gonna raise the heavens up high. It's gonna rain. 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 Children, Lord gonna send the water from Zion. You know it's gonna raise the heavens up high. It's gonna rain. It's gonna rain. It's gonna rain.
And that is the legend John Carroll. Go buy his new album, johncarroll.org, right now if you appreciate it. If you haven't already, today is the day. Have a great weekend. Talk to you tomorrow.